Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and welcome to the Ninth Annual Gerard A. Vanderhaar Symposium. Gerard Vanderhaar was a teacher, a scholar, an activist who embraced all the values of this symposium. He'd be indignant, but he was never vengeful. He was highly principled, but never intransigent. He was engaged, but never violent. He advocated peace and justice in private and public life. He would be proud that we have tonight chosen to discuss food equity, and he would value our speaker's special and creative work in that very important field. It's emblematic that today President Obama, as his visiting gift, gave Pope Francis a historic box filled with seeds to grow, to give the products to charities of the Pope's choosing. Thus, two of the world's great leaders today acknowledged how terribly important it is for all of us to think about the issue of food equity. And take just one moment. How do you feel when you're hungry? How do you act when you're hungry? Most of us, I would guess, have only had small terms of pangs, most of us in this room. Think of those people who are always hungry. How can they ever be at peace? And if they can't be at peace, how can we? How can that lead to any justice in the world? Tonight, that will be the issue that we will be exploring and examining together. Now, I invite Dr. Dominic to come forward and give the welcome for Christian Brothers College, followed by the invocation.
Good evening to you all, and this is Brother Dominic. I'm very happy to be here this evening, and I'm very happy we have such nearly a full house given the weather outside. So you're very brave. So good evening and a very special welcome to our Gerard A. Vanderhaar Symposium, all of our guests here gathered this evening. Named after the late husband of Janice, who's with us this evening, of course, and serves on the committee, on the Vanderhaar Committee. Gerard was a long-standing member of the faculty of Christian Brothers University, teaching theology and chairing the theology department for some years. And I just learned today that he also was responsible for the beginning of a sabbatical year for faculty at CBU. And that has continued up to this year for 27 years. So he really paved the way for many of us here. Janice has taken her husband's passion of the theology of peace and justice and has created an ongoing partnership with Christian Brothers through the promotion of the symposium for the last 8 years, and as Barbara indicated, this is our 9th symposium at CBU. Each symposium supports the mission of our Lasallian heritage at CBU and enhances the core of the university within the framework of faith, community, and service, which defines who we are as an institution of higher learning right here in Memphis. This year's theme of fostering a just food system is most relative and in need for action issue, and we look forward to a further way in such a distribution through our presentation this evening. Malik Yakini, you are most welcome. A member of our campus ministry team, Margareta Dobbs, will lead us in prayer as we begin our meeting this evening. Margareta?
Good evening. Let us remember we are in the holy presence of God. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. God, thank you for this season of spring as we continue to yearn for your light. Help us to do your will, remembering that somewhere there's a mother wondering if her unemployment check or food stamps will be voted on by people in suits in a city far away. Somewhere a father is wondering how can he feed, clothe, and educate his children. Somewhere the water is flowing. The smell of chemicals are poisoning what we put into our bodies. Somewhere the wind blows but stops at a wall built to separate the haves from the have-nots. Lord, please lift the fog that we may walk in our everyday lives. Give us our voice to support sound policies and insist on basic nourishment, livable wages, and humane treatment for all of your creation. Help us to continue with a journey of peace for your blessing on all humanity. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. St. John Baptist de La Salle, live Jesus in our hearts. Amen.
Thank you, Ms. Dobbs. And I have to be technologically correct. Will you please all silence any electronic pagers, phones, whatever, for the continuation of the program. Thank you. Speaking on behalf of Shelby County is a member of the Administration of Public Health Policy Advisor in the Office of the Mayor of Shelby County and Reverend of St. Andrew AME Church, and one who has very creatively in the South Memphis area helped to turn that food desert into much less of a desert through the work of the community gardens and farmers markets. The Reverend Dr. Kenneth S. Robinson.
To know Dean Frankel is to love her, and we are so grateful tonight to be with her this evening. I want to thank the committee and particularly Chris Peterson and Grove Memphis for extending this invitation to us to come and share and greet you this evening. If you don't mind, we are clergy heavy this evening. Look at your neighbor and say, it ought not be, it ought not be, it ought not be. Tell someone next to you, it ought not be. Tennessee has been designated the hungriest state in the nation. We lead the nation in hunger. This congressional district, the 9th Congressional District, has been designated the 4th hungriest congressional district in the nation. Memphis has been named America's hunger capital. Look at your neighbor and say, it ought not be, it ought not be. In a nation as wealthy as the United States, there ought not be millions of individuals who live in food insecurity. It ought not be that as the Food Trust has identified the level of food insecurity in the state of Tennessee, that over 200,000, over 1 million Tennesseans are hungry, 200,000 of whom are children. It really ought not be. It is one of the reasons that our two mayors in Memphis and Shelby County have come together to address the issues of hunger and food insecurity here. It is one of the reasons that Mayor Mark Luttrell, in his leadership of Healthy Shelby, and some of the work and the advocacy that we lead out of the mayor's office, really has chosen to focus on food insecurity. It is one of the reasons that we have joined with the Food Trust and the marvelous Food Financing Task Force that has been here in the state to push for addressing the issue of the under-resourcing of low-income communities in terms of the availability of full-service grocery stores. It ought not be that it is communities that are poor, communities that are disproportionately black, that there is little food, little access to food, and very few grocery stores. It ought not be that in those communities we find the highest rates of obesity. We find the highest rates of obesity-related diseases. We find the highest rates of diabetes. That really ought not be. And so we're delighted tonight that on behalf of Mayor Luttrell, on behalf of Healthy Shelby, this marvelous, multifaceted public-private initiative of business, healthcare providers, community-based organizations, social service agencies, that we are coming in solidarity with you to say it is not right, it is not just, it is not fair for persons in this community to live in food deserts, to not have access to nutritious and healthful foods. It is the reason that both mayors have inspired our economic development growth engine to find creative ways at place-based investment to encourage and incentivize the development of supermarkets in under-resourced communities. It is the reason that we have a proliferation of farmers markets here in Shelby County, including one that we sponsored in South Memphis, as Dean Frankel has mentioned, in a place that they said those residents would not want to have a farmer's market, and they will not utilize the farmer's market. On the other hand, our farmer's market is one of the most highly subscribed to farmer's markets in the city. We want to thank Dr. Ken Reardon and the marvelous work that he's done at the University of Memphis in helping to inspire and to facilitate the development of our market. It is the reason that in a few weeks we will open the grocer at the South Memphis Farmers Market, because we are yet a food desert for a full service grocery store, but there will be a place where year-round, 6 days a week, the residents in that poor, under-resourced African-American community, previously a desert to food, will have access to fresh produce year-round. It is the reason that I'm here tonight. And we thank you that you have a level of indignation, that you are certain that you are here because it is not right, it is not just, it is not fair that there are communities in Memphis and that there are communities, yes, Brother Yakini, in Detroit that look like the one in which I serve. Thank you for your interest, thank you for your commitment, thank you for being here. When you have the opportunity, thank Mayor Luttrell and Mayor Wharton for their investment in bringing healthful, nutritious food into our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson, for being with us tonight and for all that you do to help to address this very serious issue. For a moment, however, we're going to turn to something very happy. Jerry Vanderhaar was, of all things, an educator, and he would think it only right that we continue the effort of peace and justice through the generations, and to that end, the Vanderhaar Symposium Committee has established in his name an annual award open to students of all colleges and universities in Memphis, recognizing the students for creative and good work toward peace and justice. To introduce this year's winner, I call upon my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Catherine Causey, Chair of the Division of Business and Economic Development at Lemoyne-Owen College. Dr. Causey, come forward as well.
Good afternoon. Mr. Kubilon is a graduating senior of Lemoyne-Owen College, and he's also the Executive Director and founder of Concerned Citizens of Memphis. Throughout the years, he has significantly contributed to peace and justice in his community through his work, which includes feeding the homeless, youth prison prevention, gang redirection, and a youth summer theater camp. These initiatives truly exemplifies the spirit and practice of receiving the Gerald A. Vanderhaar Student Peace Award. Let's give him a hand. On behalf of the Vanderhaar Steering Committee, I have a plaque and a check. Which one you want first? Okay, the plaque reads, Gerald A. Vanderhaar Symposium Student Peace Award in recognition and appreciation for his hunger and thirst for justice and pursuit of peace. This award is presented to Ayele Matope Akibalon. He didn't tell me how to pronounce that one. A peacemaker working through active nonviolence in the spirit of Gerald A. Vanderhaar. Gerald A. Vanderhaar Symposium, Memphis, Tennessee, March 27, 2004. Congratulations.
Imagine with me, for just 1 second, the recent weather that we've had here in Memphis, Tennessee. It's cold outside. You have no place to go, and you haven't eaten all day. That's the state that so many individuals find themselves in this city every day. Feel with me the guilt when all you can do is take some food and extra blankets and maybe a coat or two to an individual who has tied cardboard to the exhaust fan of a barbecue place just so he can have enough heat to go to sleep. Just stand with me, if you will, and help concerned citizens of Memphis in this fight to eliminate homelessness and hunger in this city. For 14 years, my passion has been to help disenfranchised people. C.E.O. has accomplished this by giving people one of the most quintessential necessities, and that's food. We feed the homeless at the corner of Poplar and High Street, downtown, every other Sunday. On the average, we feed about 150 to 200 people every time we feed. We're trying to, at this particular stage of the game, to provide transitional housing and work toward giving them long-term housing so that we can get them off the street. This will help to build their self-esteem and also help the city's image. But as you can imagine, it's heart-wrenching to hear the stories of a woman being assaulted while trying to sleep on the street. It's also heart-wrenching to look for people that you've heard that have maybe become ill or have died because of the illnesses and no health care. And most importantly, it's really hard to look in the face of someone who's going to have to sleep out in the park in the cold because they can't beg up on enough. $7 it takes. They can't beg up on $7 a day to get into the shelter. So in closing, I want to first thank my lovely wife for seeing my vision and allowing me to take our household resources and meet our goals. Secondly, I want to thank my brother, my family, my friends, and my dedicated volunteers that stand with me in the rain, the sleet, the heat, and the snow to make this thing happen. Thirdly, I want to thank Lemoyne-Owens College staff, administrators, professors, and the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance for preparing me with the credentials to do what it is that I'm predestined to do. Last but not least, I want to thank the Gerard A. Vanderhaar Student Peace Award Committee and Ms. Janice Vanderhaar for giving me this award and this recognition. I thank you so much.
I think you can understand that the Vanderhaar Committee is very proud to be able to present this award. And as moving as that was, it was a fierce competition, fierce in the best senses, because we had such wonderful nominees for this year. And we have two finalists who I hope are present, and I'm going to call their names, and as I ask them to stand up. Iris Mercado. Junior, who has done rich and varied work, particularly with the youth and the immigrant community of Memphis. She's served with Bridges, a Mid-South Peace and Justice Center, Workers Interfaith Network, and she helped to found Youth for Youth to organize immigrant youth in this community. She is now West Tennessee Director of the Tennessee Immigration and Refugee Rights Coalition, and she is doing marvelous work to help this community, the marginalized and the disenfranchised, to become full members of this community. Ms. Mercado, congratulations on being here. Melanie Horn. Ms. Horn has done marvelous work on several continents to fight violence, injustice, poverty, genocide, hunger, human trafficking. She has worked in Rwanda, Cambodia, and Mexico, in Appalachia and Memphis. She's advocated for human rights, for women, for children, for those with disabilities, and the dispossessed. Congratulations on the wonderful work you have done and on your finalist position. I'd also like to ask any of the previous Vanderhaar Student Peace Laureates who are in the audience. I know one, I know Keone Logan is here, I don't know. Will they please stand so we can recognize them? And I know through formal and informal networks that they are all continuing to do their wonderful work. Now, I have the pleasure to introduce the introducer, who I'm going to say he's my friend, my former student, and he was a student before there was a Vanderhaar Peace Award, but I know from what he did when he was a student and the wonderful work he has continued to do ever since, that he probably would have been a Peace Laureate. And he is. We'll make you an honorary Peace Laureate. Marlon Foster has become founder and executive director of the Knowledge Quest, a marvelous network for helping youth and families in South Memphis, and he is minister of Christ Quest Community Church. It is really my pleasure to bring forward Marlon Foster, who will introduce our wonderful keynote speaker for the evening. Thank you.
Good evening. Grateful to Dean Frankel. I want to introduce our speaker for this evening. Malik Yakini is founder and executive director of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, which operates a 7-acre farm in Detroit. Along with DBCFSN, he spearheaded efforts to establish the Detroit Food Policy Council, which he also chaired. Yakini was a member of the Michigan Food Policy Council and serves on the steering committee of Undoing Racism in the Detroit Food System. From 1990 to 2011, he was executive director of N-Soroma Institute Public School Academy, one of Detroit's leading African-centered schools. Yakini was honored as Administrator of the Year by the Michigan Association of Public School Academies in 2006. He served on the board of directors of the Timbuktu Academy of Science and Technology from 2004 to 2011. He is also CEO of Black Star Educational Management. Yakini is dedicated to working towards identifying and alleviating the impact of racism and white privilege on the food system and contributing to the development of an international food sovereignty movement. He has presented at numerous national conferences on food justice and implementing community food security practices. Yakini is also featured in the book, Blacks Living Green, and the movie Urban Roots, and is currently a food community fellow for the Institute of Agriculture and Trade Policy. Let's give a warm Memphis welcome to Brother Malik Yakini.
Good evening, Memphis. Good evening. It's such a pleasure to be here. I've been here for the last 2 days and I've had a wonderful time. Let me start, as I always do, by giving thanks and praise to the Creator, who we all know by many names. But again, for me, this work is always a spiritual work, and it's rooted in a reverence for the divine. And also I have to give recognition always to my ancestors, because it's on their shoulders that I stand. There's so many people I want to thank who've been very kind over the last 2 days. I want to start with Chris and Emily from Grow Memphis, Janice Vanderhaar and the committee for the Vanderhaar Symposium, Brother Ayile Akibalan. It's such a pleasure to meet you. Dr. Golden, you weren't on my list, but since I see you sitting there, let me recognize you as well. And that lovely afro, I love the way you represent with that. Stand up just a minute so they can see you. I want to thank Brother Marlon Foster, and I had a chance yesterday to visit the operation, at least part of the operation that he's head of, the gardening part. I know that's not all that they do, but I so much appreciate the work that he's doing. And a sister who I just met yesterday who works under his direction, Jessica Gossett, who drove me around this morning and did a wonderful radio interview. And there's probably some other folks who I'm leaving out. So if you've been kind to me over the last 2 days, and I haven't mentioned your name, oh, Paul, thank you. My fellow guitar player. So to all of those who've shown me kindness, I'm greatly appreciative. And I hope that the words that I speak tonight you find to be valuable. I also want to recognize the people who are behind the scenes and the people who don't get up on the stage but who make things like this happen, such as the people who are doing the videotaping and the gentleman who's working the PowerPoint presentations and the people who set this room up and the folks who are passing out programs in the hallway and the people who will come in here after we leave and clean up the room. All of those people who do the work behind the scenes and don't get the accolades, I want to recognize them and let them all know that I'm greatly appreciative of the contribution that they're making to this program. So I bring you greetings from Detroit, and Detroit, of course, is in the news quite a bit these days. And when people often ask me, well, how are things going in Detroit? I say, well, it's kind of a mixed question, because on one hand, things are going really terribly. There's some really bad things going on in Detroit, like astronomical unemployment rates and crime and murder and drugs and homelessness and foreclosures and bankruptcy and an emergency manager who's appointed by the governor, whose powers supersede those of the elected officials. All of those things are pretty bad, but Detroit is a very resilient city, so in the face of those bad things, there's also lots of good things going on. And Detroit has a spirit that refuses to be broken. And so in the face of these challenges, many people are stepping up and finding innovative ways to deal with the conditions that we're faced with. So although I have the opportunity to come and speak often before audiences around the country, I'm really representing people whose faces you don't see. People who are doing much of this work in Detroit, the work of urban agriculture, and the work of creating just food policy, and the work of creating a just food system. There are hundreds and hundreds of people doing this work in the city of Detroit. So I bring you greetings on behalf of all of them. Specifically, I bring you greetings on behalf of the organization that I serve as executive director of, the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, and also of a group that I work with called Uprooting Racism, Planting Justice. It used to be called Undoing Racism in the Food System. And then also I want to bring you greetings on behalf of the many growers. There's more than 1,500 gardens in the city of Detroit that are officially registered. And there's other gardens who are not on the radar because they don't want to be on the radar, because they're maybe on some land that they don't have authorization to be on. But they're doing very good work, and many of them are my teachers and my comrades, so I bring you greetings on their behalf as well. So how many growers do we have in the audience? If you are a grower, throw your hands up. Okay, put your hands together for these people. You know, gardening on a small level, like in your backyard, that can be very therapeutic. But when you start doing it on a larger level, on a production level, it's work, it's serious work. And so I just want to recognize all of those who are here in Memphis who are doing that work, who are putting their hands in the soil and getting their hands dirty and producing food and regaining these skills, many of the skills that we lost, that our ancestors had, that as we become more urbanized and more modernized, that we've left behind sometimes. So those who are renewing this agricultural tradition, I just want to recognize you and say big up. I want to read you a story, and I know a couple people have heard this before. A couple people who heard me speak in Little Rock last year at the Southern Soil Conference. But so for For those who've heard it, just bear with me. But for many of you, maybe you're hearing this for the first time. And I call this a classic story retold. You may have heard a version of this story before, but this is a version that has a slightly modern twist to it. But this is also a story that requires you to participate. Is that all right? That's all right? Brother, I appreciate your words too. I want to let you know that was what you had to say was absolutely profound. So the way you're going to participate is, well, first of all, this story is called The Little Red Hen. You may have heard that before. You've heard that story? And so the part that you participate on, you say, "And she did." Can you say that? And she did. Excellent. Okay, let's get this rolling. Once upon a time, in a village in Africa, a hen scratched about the yard until she uncovered some grains of wheat. She called to her neighbors and said, "If we plant this wheat, we can have bread to eat. Who will help me plant it?" "Not I," said the cow. "I thought slavery was over." I always have to stop and explain this. My experience has been, and you all tell me if you've had this experience, when working with African American youth and doing gardening, usually within the first 15 to 20 minutes we hear some reference to slavery. And so one of the things I often hear from young people is, "I thought slavery was over," or "You're working me like a slave." "Not I," said the goat. "It probably won't grow anyway." "Not I," said the duck. "I'm much too busy." "Not I," said the lamb. "I don't do dirt." "Then I will," said the little red hen. And she did. After a few months, the wheat grew tall and ripened into golden grains reaching up toward the sun. Beneficial insects and beautiful birds began to return to the village. The little red hen again called to her neighbors, "Who will help me harvest this wheat?" "Not I," said the cow. "My stomach's ache." "Not I," said the goat. "I don't really get involved in groups." "Not I," said the duck. "I have a wheat allergy." "Not I," said the lamb. "My favorite rapper, Young Shepherd, is performing in a free concert this afternoon." "Then I will harvest it myself," said the little red hen. And she did. The hen carried the wheat back to her house and asked her neighbors, "Who will help me grind the wheat into flour?" "Not I," said the cow. "I already have 2 jobs." "Not I," said the goat. "I don't have anyone to watch my kids." "Not I," said the duck. "I'm trying to get paid." "Not I," said the lamb. "You running game, hen. You trying to pull the wool over my eyes." "Then I will grind it myself," said the little red hen. And she did. After resting from the exhausting work of grinding the grain, the little red hen made one last attempt to solicit the help of her neighbors. "Who will help me make this flour into dough and bake the bread?" She was met with the usual litany of excuses. "Not I," said the cow. "Chewing cud takes all the energy I've got." "Not I," said the goat. "My kids have music lessons." "Not I," said the duck. "My cousin Donald and his family are visiting from out of town." "Not I," said the lamb. "I'm studying for my real estate license." "Then I will bake the bread myself," said the little red hen. And she did. As the aroma of the fresh baked bread drifted into the village, the little red hen's neighbors began to gather outside her door. "Who will help me eat this bread?" asked the little red hen. "I will," said the cow. "I will," said the goat. "I will," said the duck. "I will," said the lamb. "No, you won't," said the little red hen. "None of you practiced Ujima, collective work and responsibility." However, my beloved neighbors, I didn't grind all of the grain. I started a seed bank to have wheat for next year. Here's a handful of grain for each of you, and she sent them packing. As the little red hen sat down to enjoy her still warm bread with honey from the beehives that her friend Abba maintained at a local farm, the cow, the goat, the duck, and the lamb called a meeting to form an organic, sustainable farming collective. The next season, they all worked together to plant, harvest, and grind the wheat and to bake bread. There was plenty for all. They donated some to the animals who were homeless or sick and sold the surplus at farmers' markets in neighboring villages. The village continued to prosper and eventually started manufacturing farming and baking equipment. The Little Red Hen was elected chief of the village council. So sometimes I like to begin with some humor because it gets people to relax, because there's some serious issues that we have to talk about. And sometimes if I just delve right into it, if I just start my talk and I say, white supremacy, and everybody would just shut down, right? So I don't want to start like that. So we'll start in a more relaxed manner, and we'll get into the more serious issues. So the urban agricultural movement and the food movement seems to have captured the popular imagination throughout this country. For whatever reason, I don't know if the stars are aligned or what has happened, but certainly one of the factors that has helped with this is the First Lady's promotion of healthy eating and the garden on the White House lawn. But in every community I travel to, and I do a lot of traveling across the country, there are people who are planting community gardens. There's people who have farmers markets. There's people who are starting food policy councils or food policy advisory councils. Did I get it right? There are people who are teaching young people about nutrition all across this country. For some reason, people seem to really gravitate towards this food movement. So it's a tremendous opportunity. And it gives us the opportunity to examine new possibilities in several areas. One of those areas is the more sustainable and ecological production of food. The reality is that in the world today, the majority of the world's population is concentrated in urban areas. There used to be a time when the majority of the population of the world lived in rural areas. But throughout the world, people are leaving rural areas and coming to urban areas. So we have these urban metropolises across the planet that are struggling to feed huge numbers of people. And so one of the problems with the current food system is that we're transporting food tremendous distances. In fact, in the United States, food is transported in an average of about 1,500 miles from the place it's produced to where it's consumed. And so if we're transporting food 1,500 miles, we're putting tremendous amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. And in fact, the current industrial agricultural system is one of the major causes of greenhouse gases, the way food is produced in the United States, and also the agricultural runoff from the fertilizers that are used are one of the major causes of the degradation of the waterways throughout this country. And so by dealing with more sustainable and organic practices, and also by localizing our food system so that the food is grown closer to where we have this population density, we solve two problems simultaneously. We provide greater access to food closer to where people are, and also we reduce the distances that food has to travel, thus being more environmentally friendly. One of the other possibilities that the urban agriculture movement and the food movement holds is that we provide greater access to healthy food. And we just heard that in Memphis, as in Detroit, and various other urban and rural areas throughout the United States, there are people who don't have enough to eat. And you're right, it ought not be. In the richest country in the world, it ought not be that there are people who don't have enough food. In fact, that's obscene that in America people could be hungry. And so this urban agriculture movement, the food movement, brings about the possibility of providing food access, high quality food to all people. We also have a problem in cities like Detroit, and perhaps to a lesser extent in Memphis and other cities, of having huge tracts of vacant land. In fact, in the city of Detroit, we have about 103,000 vacant lots. About 1/3 of the 139 square mile geographic footprint of the city of Detroit is vacant land. And so urban agriculture provides us with the opportunity to both rethink what a city can be and to rethink this notion of how green spaces fit into cities, but it also provides us with the opportunity to rethink how we can grow food closer to where people are actually living. And so it gives us the option of using vacant and underutilized land in a constructive way. The urban agriculture and the food movement give us the possibility of constructing a food system which has more collective ownership. We live in a system which is a capitalist system. And I'll tell you personally, in my organization, we are anti-capitalist. We don't think that capitalism is a good system for human beings. We don't think it's good to have 1% of the people owning 85% of the wealth. And in a capitalist system where profit is the primary motive, that supersedes what's best for human beings. And so the current food movement has the possibility of creating a more collectively owned food system that really works for the benefit of the majority of people. And finally, food is a tremendous lens because it's a great uniter, regardless of your so-called race, regardless of your religion, regardless of your gender, regardless of your sexual orientation, we all eat. And so food becomes this great common denominator that has the possibility of uniting people to move towards social justice generally. So our organization views food work as important in and of itself, but we also view it as being important because it is a lens to view this larger movement for social justice. But in order to create a more just food system, there's some things that we have to address. And one of the things that we have to address is the food movement itself. The reality is that we still live in a society where racism is a reality. And I like to use the term white supremacy because really there's a global system of white supremacy. And I'm not talking about white supremacy where you have people running around with hoods on burning crosses, right? Not that kind. But we live in a world where people still have privilege based on their skin color. And it's what we call unearned privilege. And we also have wealth that is passed down intergenerationally. And so because people get involved in the food movement doesn't mean that they've unpacked all that baggage, right? They might be concerned about having good quality food and organic food and things like that. But it doesn't mean that they've left behind the vestiges of racist thinking, not conscious racist thinking. You know, the thing about the racism that exists today is it's so subtle that we all participate in it almost unknowingly. In fact, there's a book by Peggy McIntosh called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, because it's not that people are consciously, for the most part, it's not that people are consciously participating in racism, but it's that we unintentionally have internalized the concepts that are associated with it. And that's all of us. Nobody escapes it. Whether you identify as a white person, whether you identify as a black person, whether you identify as another person of color, none of us escape it. We're all participating in it. And so the thing is to be aware of it, to be aware of how we unconsciously participate in this system. So the food movement itself needs to do some examination, some introspection, so that it can become a model of justice and equity. So we have some internal house cleaning that we have to do within the food movement so that we can model for the larger society what justice and equity really looks like. We also have we are required ethically to uphold this idea that food is a human right, that access to good food is a human right, regardless of your economic station in life. As a result of being a human being on this earth, you have the God-given right to have access to adequate amounts of high-quality, culturally appropriate food. And so we have to uphold that right. And we can't buy into these arguments that are often waged about, you know, particularly as it comes to black women who might have multiple children, that they're leeching off the system and, you know, they're welfare queens or whatever. We can't buy it. In fact, I was in a radio interview today with with Mary Beth Conley, and she talked about the real welfare queens are these corporations that are getting these huge subsidies, right? So we have to uphold the principle that food is a human right. We have to support struggles for livable wages and safe working conditions for workers within the food system. As you probably know, much of the food in this country is planted and harvested by migrant workers, many of whom are so-called illegals. And I say so-called because I really don't buy into that logic. In fact, I call Colorado and New Mexico and Texas northern Mexico. And if you study history, you know that basically that language is gangster. Well, for that matter, the whole continent was gangster from the indigenous people. So we have people who are crossing over these arbitrary man-made borders in order to try to better their quality of life. And often they are working for wages which are not livable wages, in conditions that are not safe, and are often exploited. In fact, many of the women who are migrant workers are raped and sexually abused. And sometimes men working in meat packing plants are working under very unsafe conditions. And so all of that is part of the food system. As we're looking at how we create a just food system, we have to think about the workers within the food system also. And we all participate in this. None of us get off scot-free, right? Because we want cheap food, and we want what we want when we want it. We want foods that aren't in season. And so in a sense, we perpetuate these inequities within the food system. So if we really want justice in the food system, we also have to be aware that we need justice for workers within the food system. The other thing is this, sometimes the food movement can be very elitist. I eat organic food myself. Let me own my own stuff, and I'm a vegan, so I'm very particular about what I put in my body. And I'm not pushing out on anybody else. That's my personal preference. But the reality is that there's many people who can't afford organic food, and who can't afford to go to Whole Foods, and who can't afford to make healthy food choices. So part of having a just food system is making sure that everyone in society has a living wage so that they can afford to buy high quality food. And the other reality is that the food that we consume is artificially cheap. And that might seem, like an oxymoron, but because we're not paying the true price of the food that we consume. Again, because workers are being exploited, and many of the costs associated with the production of food are externalized. We don't really see them, we don't absorb them ourselves. And so if we really paid the real cost of food, we'd be paying more than we pay now. So the answer to that is that people in America have to have a livable wage so they can afford to buy high quality food. So the struggle for food justice is not disconnected from the struggle for justice in society in general. Also owning my own stuff, I am a reforming chauvinist. And I say reforming because I've been working on this for the last 30 years. And I'm much further ahead than I was 30 years ago. But the women around me remind me that I still have a long way to go. And so I own that, and I acknowledge that, and I'm in process, I'm working on it. Because I recognize that we can't have a society that reaches its full potential if women are suppressed and oppressed and aren't encouraged to reach their full development. Somebody say, Ashe. Ashe. And so the development of the society is directly tied to the development of women. And not only of women, but also men can't be their whole selves unless we acknowledge the feminine energy that runs through us. Many times in society, men are trying to be macho, and I'm, again, acknowledging my own stuff, because as a young man, I was trying to be macho and all that. Part of it is because, living in the hood, if you show any kind of, like, you're not macho, you may get beat down, right? And so you take on this artificial, you put on this mask, and if you're not careful, the mask becomes the man. So, when I was about 28, I began to realize the importance of this feminine energy within myself in my quest to be whole. And so if we want society to be whole, we have to uplift this divine feminine energy. And part of that means that we have to, as it manifests within women, that we have to promote and encourage women to be in positions of leadership. And so sometimes that means men have to step back and make space right? And we can't take up all the air in the room, and we have to encourage, right? We have to encourage women to step up, and we have to be supportive of that. I can tell you some stories I've seen, and I know there's some sisters in the audience who've also had experiences where maybe you're working in a garden or whatever, and everything's going smoothly, and then the testosterone shows up, right? And particularly, testosterone and power tools is a bad combination. That could be a whole lecture in itself, but I'm not going to go into that right now. But I'll just say there's critical importance that we struggle against chauvinism and that we lift women up and we acknowledge and lift up the divine feminine energy. And then, of course, working for racial equity is of the utmost importance. At the turn of the last century, the great African-American scholar W.E.B. Du Bois said that the problem of the 20th century was the problem of the color line. And I think he would be surprised, perhaps, going to this century, that it continues to be a major problem in American society. But the reality is we are not in a post-racial America. We are not in a post-racial world. Racism is still very much a reality, but it manifests much more subtly now than it did in the past. And so one of the steps to healing this great cancer upon our society is acknowledging that it exists. And so the reality is that we live in a world where there's a system of global white supremacy. And that manifests itself culturally. For example, today is, what day is today? What's the day of the week? Thursday. Thor's Day. That's interesting. So why are we calling this day of the week after a Norse god? Right? Tomorrow is Fry's Day. Yesterday was Woden's Day. See, these are subtle things. We don't even think about it. We just grow up and somebody say, oh, it's Wednesday, right? But how would the world be different? How would white people see the world differently if instead of calling today Thor's Day, you call it Ogun's Day? Hey, Rue's Day, right? See, a whole lot of people be mad at that, but we think nothing of defining reality through the eyes of Europeans. And so white supremacy manifests itself culturally, but it also manifests itself politically, and we see these vehement attacks on the current president of the United States. And I'm not really a defender of Barack Obama. Let me say that. I think he's probably the best president the United States ever had, but as I heard Angela Davis say when she was campaigning for him, she said, don't get it twisted though, he's president of the racist, imperialist, sexist United States of America. Okay, let's be clear. Okay, and I mean, if we examine his actions, they leave a lot to be desired also. But nevertheless, he's probably the best president the United States has had. But I mean, these just constant attacks on him are unheard of. The attacks on the First Lady, are unheard of. I mean, this has never happened before. And so this is part of the way that this racism, this white supremacy manifests itself in the political spheres. It manifests itself in the economic and military spheres as well. And I could go on and on, but again, because I have limited time, I'm not going to give multiple examples. But we all have this personal work to do. Racism manifests on many different levels. And one of the levels it manifests on is the personal level. And so first, that's what I want to speak to, that we all have this introspection and this self-examination to do. Because as I said earlier, none of us gets off scot-free. We all participate in it. So for people who are defined as white, and let me back up and just say, as I said yesterday during my talk, that the concept of race is really, it's a social construct. It's not a scientific and biological reality. There's enough information that exists that we know that human beings share millions of genes, and the things that make us look different one from the other are very few. So it's not a scientific reality, but it is a social reality that we have to contend with, at least for the time being. And so, but we can't really contend with it unless we acknowledge it and move past it. It's kind of like if you go to AA, and I know nobody in here has ever been to AA or anything like that. But the first step in your healing is to acknowledge, I am an alcoholic, right? And then once you acknowledge that, then you can start to work on it. But if you're in denial, you can never get to the work of healing. And so the same thing with racism, right? Until we acknowledge that we are active participants in it, we can never be about the work of ridding ourselves of the internalized vestiges of it. And so for people who identify as white, this idea of supremacy manifests itself in, as I said earlier, unearned privilege, and often in arrogance, and often this idea that white people have the responsibility to come into other communities and tell other people what to do, and that they have the best ideas, and that their view of the world is the best view of the world, and their standards of beauty and of speaking and of behavior are the standards by which everyone else should judge themselves and should adhere to. And for people of color, we have the issue of having internalized racism and internalized oppression, and having a diminished view of ourselves, and a view of ourselves that suggests that we are not fully capable human beings, and that somehow white people have an exclusive monopoly on shaping the affairs of the world, and that it's better that we just kind of sit back and allow the power players to shape reality. And so we have that healing to do, so that we see ourselves as fully capable human beings, and that we take back our God-given rights to shape our own lives, to shape our communities, and to shape the world that we live in. But in addition to racism manifesting on the personal level, it also manifests in a structural way within the society. And so we have to aggressively attack this racism within the structures of society as well. So, again, it manifests within the food movement. So I want to talk just in the few minutes I have left about some of the ways that racism manifests within this food movement. And one of the ways it manifests is that it determines whose voices are heard and whose voices are not heard. And so typically, as you look around the country at the voices who are speaking on behalf of the food movement, they are typically young white people or sometimes older white people. But there's many, many people doing this work, and the reason that you don't hear the voices of many of the, for example, black women who are doing this work is because of structural racism. The racism determines whose image is projected and how those images are projected. You know, I've gone to many conferences where you have many food conferences where you have white-led nonprofits who are talking about the work they do, and inevitably, in their PowerPoint presentation, they have a picture of the white folks who are working in black communities with a young black child, and so that relationship is troubling, right? So those images constantly being projected are troubling. But racism also helps to determine who gets funded and who is allowed to build capacity. So within this, as we're trying to create a just food movement, funders have a tremendously important role to play as well. One of the funders that funds the work of the organization that I serve as chair of is the Kellogg Foundation. And I have to say that the Kellogg Foundation has taken some very bold and courageous steps because they have declared themselves to be an anti-racist foundation. And not only have they declared themselves to be that, but they require the grantees that receive funds from them to adopt a racial equity lens. And they require, that actions be taken to try to reform those organizations so that they are manifesting, at least attempting to manifest racial equity. And so other funders, I think, have a responsibility to do the same thing, to use the power that they have and the leverage that they have to require groups to begin to look at the world through a lens of racial equity and to begin to change the kind of structural inequities that we see existing in the nonprofit world. Funders have the ability and the responsibility to encourage the hiring of people of color, particularly in leadership positions, at the board levels and at the executive levels, not just the low man or the low woman on the totem pole, right? But we need people of color in leadership positions within the food movement. Funders have the ability and the responsibility to require that for conferences they provide funds for, that there be a track that deal with racial justice, not just one workshop, but a whole series of workshops continually, year after year, that address this idea of racial justice. So one of the things that I do as I travel around the country is I lift up the stories the narratives of various people of color who are doing this work, because if the stories are not known, if the narratives are not known, then we buy into this idea that black folks and other people of color are not doing this work. So I want to show you I want to introduce you to some of my sister friends who are doing this work. And so one is Jenga Wendo, who's a friend of mine who lives in the lower Ninth Ward of New Orleans, and she's doing tremendous work with a group that she founded called the Backyard Gardeners Network. And you know, the lower Ninth Ward was devastated by Hurricane Katrina. And so Jenga tells us that she's not really into production. She's not trying to produce food to make money on food. She's using gardening as a tool to build community unity and to build a consensus among the members of her neighborhood about what they want to see within their neighborhood. Another woman who I have great respect for is Cynthia Hayes, who lives in Savannah, Georgia, who is the founder of the Southeast African American Farmers Organic Network. They've organized more than 120 farmers in the southeastern part of the United States who are practicing organic farming. And they recently introduced a Caribbean initiative starting in St. Thomas, where they're beginning to teach organic farmer training in the Caribbean. This is Angela Green, who lives in Kansas City, Kansas, and she runs a small community garden in her neighborhood called Salt of the Earth Youth Market Garden, where she's teaching the young people in her neighborhood how to grow produce and how to sell that produce in order to make a few dollars. And again, is transforming the neighborhood that she grew up in. This is my friend Olufemi Lewis, who is in Asheville, North Carolina, who is both doing gardening and also has a project called the Ujamaa Mobile Food Market. They recently purchased a truck, and they're trying to get the rest of the funding to drive around the community and provide access to food in areas that formerly didn't have that access. And my latest sister friend who is doing this work is right here in Memphis, and in just the little more than 24 hours I've known her, I've developed a great deal of respect for her dedication and her enthusiasm in this work. And so if you don't know Jessica, guys, in fact, Jessica, stand up, please. Don't be shy, we're gonna lift you up. So if you don't know her, you need to get to know her, right? And so this is part of what I'm saying. We need to find who are these female leaders doing this work and lift them up and help them and encourage them. Tell them, don't be shy, sister, get out there and do what you have to do, right? So she's an up-and-coming leader, so I just want to acknowledge her. I had a whole PowerPoint I was going to do for you, but out of respect for the time limits, and Barbara Frankel already told me that at a certain point she's gonna get kind of nasty with me. So with her sitting behind me, and she's got a cane. Actually I have about 6 minutes. So what I'll do is I'll try to rush through this very quickly, but I will respect the time limits because I don't want to.
Canes down there.
Okay, all right. I don't want to incur the wrath. So as I said, I'm from Detroit, and Detroit is famous for many reasons. One, it gave the Model T Ford to the world and the assembly line style of production. It gave Verner's ginger ale to the world. Y'all like that, huh? These guys right here, that's who I wanted to be like when I was a young guy. Anybody know who that is? The Temptations. Oh, you know that. And y'all know Betty Bebop Carter? If y'all don't know, you better ask somebody. As much as I love Detroit, though, it reflects much of what is wrong in post-industrial cities. And I really like this picture because it's reflective of the kind of two Detroits that we're faced with. In the background, you see what's called the Renaissance Center, the building of which was spearheaded by the Ford Motor Company, and interestingly, is now the world headquarters of General Motors. But in the foreground, you see the Packard Motor Plant, which has been abandoned since the 1950s. In fact, there's people who come to Detroit specifically to see this plant, and they take pictures and they show those pictures all around the world. So some people think that all of Detroit looks like that, right? We call that ruin porn, where they come and take pictures of all the worst parts of Detroit. And so some people think Detroit is just a vast, abandoned wasteland with thousands of dogs roaming. I mean, seriously, I was in Toronto last year visiting a friend, and the day I was there was a newspaper article on the front page of the Toronto Star, I think it's called, and it was talking about these thousands of wild dogs in Detroit. And so people have the impression that, you know, it's like some kind of wild, wild west situation. And it's not, it's just not like that. But the reality is that there are abandoned buildings, and so that the picture in the foreground is the Packard Motor Plant, which has sat abandoned since the 1950s. I saw a building that looked very much like that today, by the way, here. So Detroit's population declined from a high of about close to 2 million, actually 1,900,000 in 1950 to 713,000 according to the 2010 census. And as you can imagine, it's very difficult to maintain the city infrastructure when you have a tax base that is less than half the size that it was. Detroit's unemployment rate is consistently twice the national average. As I said, there's 161,000, no, I didn't say this, there's 161,000 dwellings that have been abolished between 1970 and 2000, and there's many more that need to be. There's 103,000 vacant lots currently in the city, about 60% of which are owned by the city government itself. All the major chains have left the city of Detroit. In 2007, Farmer Jack left, being the last chain. There's now a Whole Foods that opened in June of last year, which is a national chain, but it's not really accessible to everyone. Something that's not often talked about is that officially 40,000 Detroiters have their water shut off. Now I say officially because in the neighborhood there's brothers that ride around in a van, and when the water department comes and shuts your water, are you the police? You don't have jurisdiction in Detroit. Well, so when the water department comes to shut people's water off, then some brothers in a van roll up about 15 minutes later and say, well, $25, we'll cut it back on. So officially 40, and I'm not advocating that. Exactly. Officially 40,000 people have their water shut off. So in a word, Detroit is food insecure. I want to talk to you briefly about the organization that I chair. We started in 2006. We had the following 6 purposes. Read real fast because I'm not going to go over that. In fact, you can go to our website. I'll give the website address earlier. But the thing that makes our group unique, there's many groups doing this work in the city of Detroit. The work that makes our group unique is that we hold the belief and the practice that the most effective movements grow organically out of the communities that they're designed to serve. Not movements that come from the outside and are imposed on communities. And so the thing that really makes our group unique is that we are long-term Detroiters who live in the community. We're not coming into another community trying to do work. We're doing the work in the community that we live in ourselves. That's how the most effective movements are developed. We have several initiatives. The Food Warriors Youth Development Program, which teaches young people gardening and teaches young people about nutrition. The Ujamaa Food Co-op Buying Club, which is a monthly buying club. We're working very hard to morph that into a brick and mortar cooperative grocery store. We have the What's for Dinner lecture series that we co-sponsor with the Detroit Public Library. And I mentioned earlier that we have this group that spun off from our work and to work with another farm in Detroit called Earthworks Urban Farm, which is called Uprooting Racism, Planting Justice, where we have monthly gatherings that address the issue of racism within the food system. Our biggest and most labor-intensive project is D-Town Farm, which is a 7-acre organic farm in a city park. These are some pictures from D-Town Farm. Up here at the upper, I can't tell if that's your left or right, but whatever that is. That's some young interns that we had working in the summer of 2008. And the same thing, first couple of days they were out there, they were talking about slavery and, overseers and all kinds of stuff. But by the time the summer was over, and they saw, the carrots that they planted grow and the greens that they planted grow, they were loving it. This is Bambi. Bambi and her family inhabit parts of the park that we live in. And so the first 2 years, we didn't have a deer fence around our farm. And year one, we planted 750 tomato plants and harvested less than 5 pounds of tomatoes. So we now have a 10-foot deer fence around the entire farm because deer can jump over a 6-foot fence from a standstill. And then these are some of our collard greens. I don't know if this is true or not, but people tell me that the collard greens from D-Town Farm are the sweetest collard greens in Detroit. So I want to believe that. These are some other views. This is kale, which I never had till I was a grown man. All my life, all I had was mustard, scallops, turnips. Y'all know about that? Yep. That's all I knew about it. And then I discovered kale one day. I was like, wow. So kale is not my favorite vegetable. So that's 2 of the types of kale that we grow. And that's me right there. Just so I can prove I don't just go around and talk, I actually do some work too. So an important part of our work as an organization is combating this lens through which many African Americans view agricultural work, which is tainted with the painful experiences of enslavement, tenant farming, sharecropping. And so part of our work is reframing this work as honorable work and reframing the work as an active community self-determination. We were the lead organization creating the Detroit Food Policy Council. I'm going to go through this part very quickly, but I'll just say that we think it's important that government behave in a responsible way and that we have policies that create an environment that allow good people to do good work. You can go to our website and get all this information about what's in the policy, but the most important thing is that the policy that we wrote called for the creation of the Detroit Food Policy Council. And the Food Policy Council has been in existence since 2009. I was the chair from 2009 through 2011. I resigned last year to really focus on this grocery store. I resigned from the council. My term as chair ran out in 2011, but I resigned from the council altogether last year, or the year before last, to focus on the grocery store that we're creating. So the Food Policy Council implements and monitors the Detroit food security policy. It issues an annual Detroit food system report. All this is online, by the way, if you want to get a copy of that report. It does a weekly column in the Michigan Citizen newspaper, which is the most progressive newspaper in the city. We have an annual Powering Up the Local Food System Summit, which is occurring in Detroit next week. And then we have various work groups that citizens can become involved with. Then I mentioned already this group, Uprooting Racism, Planting Justice. I'm just going to go by that very quickly. And ending, I'll say that we started our group in 2006, and we call our group the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, because at that time we weren't really familiar with this term of food sovereignty. But as we've learned more about this idea of food sovereignty, really what we're advocating and the work we're doing is really the work of food sovereignty, more so than just the work of food security. My friend Raj Patel says that you can have food security in prison, right? Food security speaks to basically having enough food. And so while we think that's important, we want much more than that. We want control of the food system. We want to shape the food system that impacts our life. So these are some of the principles of food sovereignty as advocated and articulated by Via Campesina, a huge international organization of peasants, people who work the land, and we are in agreement with all of those principles of food sovereignty. So for us, the concepts of food security, food justice, and environmental stewardship are all embedded in the concept of food sovereignty. And we think it's very important. I really didn't get a chance to talk about this at all, but there's an economic component to food. So in the city of Detroit, where we spend millions of dollars per day on food, those profits from that food does not circulate within our community to create community empowerment and wealth. And we are very concerned about that. That is part of food justice, that we don't see profits extracted from our communities and used to build other communities up, but that the money that we spend circulates within our communities to create empowerment, wealth, and ownership within our own communities. We also deserve to be treated with dignity by those from whom we obtain food. We have a serious problem in the city of Detroit with women being disrespected when they go into food stores to buy food, being propositioned and being sexually assaulted. And we have a problem with men and children being suspected of stealing, every time they go into a store. And so it's a terrible problem, and it exists because of the imbalance of power between the group that owns most of the stores in Detroit and the majority African American population in the city of Detroit. So as I said earlier, food is this tremendous lens that can be a lens to spur the larger the larger social justice movement. We think it's important that we look not only at the symptoms of food insecurity and food injustice, but that we really dig deeply into the root causes and we begin to address and attack the root causes of hunger and poverty in this country. So for more information, these are some websites that you can go to. The first, www.beblackandgreen.com, is my personal website. I interview black food activists across the country, and I put video interviews on the website. I also have a blog on the site, and so if you're interested in getting more insight in some of the work that I'm involved in, you can go to that site. If you want more information on the organization that I chair, the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, you can go to www.detroitblackfoodsecurity.org, and if you want information on the Detroit Food Policy Council, you can go to www.detroitfoodpolicycouncil.net. So I want to thank you for your attention. I think I have almost adhered to the time frame. I don't feel anyone sneaking up behind me with a cane, so I'll assume that I've done fairly well. Thank you very much.
Now that we've got to put the cane down, I'm going to pick it up and get up. It was wonderful. Thank you very much for that very meaningful message, one that I know we can translate easily into Memphis, and I hope it stirs more of us into understanding and participating. I'd like to thank, obviously, our wonderful speaker, Malik Yakini. I'd like to thank all of the program participants who were here on the podium and who escaped the lights and went down into the thank you very much. I would particularly like to thank and acknowledge our new partner this year, Grow Memphis, and the incredible work of Chris Peterson and Emily Holmes. And to all the members of Grow Memphis who are here tonight. Of course, the Vanderhaar Symposium would never occur without the leadership and the dedication of Janice Vanderhaar. Janice, can't see you, but I know you're here. And without the support of all of the members of the steering committee of the Vanderhaar Symposium, who I know are in the audience, wave your hands and let us acknowledge you. And all of the donors and supporters. I know a lot of you are here, a lot of them are away and not here, but we really do appreciate the support that we receive. We would not be able to hold the Vanderhaar Symposium without the hosting of Christian Brothers University, which gives us so much. The wonderful students who are hosting, and one young lady, I hadn't had the world's best day. We all knew about the rain, and she made the sunshine by giving us flowers as her random act of kindness. So thank to all the students who helped, to the staff, to the many staff who have helped in so many ways to make this event possible. We've already been acknowledged, and thank you for a speaker for knowing how much they do to make all of this possible. And to the facilities, we want to give special thanks to certain contributors for this event: Martin Brock, Corey Duggan, Steve Ritter of Aramark Corporation, and Maximilian's Catering. And that brings me to the other part of food, the fun part. We are all asked to gather and enjoy some tasty, healthy food in the reception area. We will all mingle and meet, and I hope Mr. Yakini won't mind my saying he will be present to chat with the audience, as will any of the program participants or any of the others. And this is in honor of all of the students, Mr. Kubalan, Ms. Horn, Ms. Mercado, and all of the former Peace Laureates who are with us tonight. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope to meet you in the reception.